All right, Helen, I think we may be able to go ahead and get started. We may have a few people
Okay.
still joining, but you're welcome to begin when you're ready.
All right. Thank you so much, Allison. And thank you everybody who has logged in for the webinar today. Hopefully preparing your proposal is something that is on the minds of lots of the folks on this call. The purpose of this webinar is really to just give general tips on submitting proposals, writing proposals, just starting to take that first step into, conference presentations. And of course, there will be, information towards the end about the OTC conference proposals, which have opened. But before we get into that, I want to share, who I am. My name's Helen Duca. I'm with the University of Akron. I work in the Transfer and Adult Student Enrollment Center as the Senior Assistant Director. And then for OTC, this is my first time being on the Events and Professional Development Committee I co-chair with Melissa Swafford. So I'm really happy. This is, I think, a really exciting and useful webinar. So I'm hoping folks enjoy it as well. And I'm so lucky to be sharing the time and space with two other really great speakers. We have Stephanie Kiba, who is also from the University of Akron, working as the Assistant Director for Exploratory Advising and Academic Support and Student Success Center. And then Allison Morgan, Transfer Specialist with Cuyahoga Community College. So I asked both of these two wonderful individuals if they'd like to share some of their wisdom and experiences with conference presentations. So, I'd love to hear a little bit more about each of your backgrounds as it pertains to, what you do when you're not doing a webinar with me, and also, maybe some background on your background with presenting.
Sure. So I'm Allison. I am a transfer specialist for Tri-C's West Shore campus. I've been in this role for almost 2 years, but I've been working with transfer students and specifically Tri-C transfer students for almost 10 years. In a previous position at Case Western, I managed a grant that was designed to help students transfer from community colleges to Case to major in the humanities. The bulk of my initial conference proposal experience was during that grant. Part of one of our initiatives was that we had to present our findings at conferences. So I was just telling Amanda and Helen before the call that in 2019 we did 6 conference presentations or different kinds of presentations. And as someone with pretty severe social anxiety, that was terrifying. I am happy to say I've gotten more comfortable with presenting at conferences and actually look forward to it now. I still get nerves, of course, but yeah, at the very, very beginning, I was completely terrified, and it does get better, I promise.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Kiba, and I work at the University of Akron. In my role at the university, I work with transitional students who are undecided, maybe become undecided while they're at the university. But I also advise some of our pathway programs, including our students that are holistically reviewed for admission, as well as our campus partnership programs with the LeBron James Family Foundation, I Promise, and our partnership programs with some of our community colleges, including Direct Connect with Stark State. Another hat that I wear is I also coordinate all of our placement testing on campus. I made a joke earlier in the when we were logging in that we wear many hats at many higher education institutions, so that's pretty normal. My conference background expertise is I've presented at many regional conferences, not just on the OTC side, but also on the advising side with our regional NACADA conferences. I have a little bit of anxiety when I present, but mostly I get excited when I present because I look at it like teaching. And if you know me, I teach 2 classes every semester, and every single time I'm in front of people, I like to engage. I find it exciting to meet new people, to share ideas, and I like to have fun.
That's a really great way to approach something that I think gives people social anxiety. Like I'm thinking about myself when I'm thinking about that, like advice that you've just shared. So, thank you. So I guess I'm kind of curious, like where would you even start if you were trying to pick a topic to present on?
The best advice that I've ever been given, and this is not just for presentation topics, but it's also for if you're thinking about doing research, is to pick a topic that you are interested in. Because if you pick a topic you're interested in, you're going to be able to easily talk about it. It helps you overcome some of that social anxiety that you might have. And normally, if you're really interested in that topic, you can go on and on and on about features or different items or research that's up and coming. And then try to find a way to approach that topic in a way that might be different from how you've seen it presented, that might be more engaging for an audience. What's your spin or your take on that particular subject?
Yep, I absolutely agree with all of that. Something else I would say is if you feel like there's something that's been missing that you know, have wanted to learn about, or you know a little bit about, and you think it's something that would be valuable for your peers to know, that is always incredibly valuable. It's just kind of like, what have you noticed that needs to be talked about more? It doesn't mean you need to be the expert on a field as long as you feel comfortable talking about it. I have honestly brought in like case study examples at the end of a conversation where we engage the whole room, where I don't have the answers. I'm working with a student. I'm really struggling to find supports for them. I'll just pull the room and see if anybody knows of something I don't. So it's a really good way to get some collaborative information going and to learn about resources you also might not know about for an area you might be particularly passionate about.
That is incredible advice because and I feel like I'm just going to be hyping you guys up this whole time because it's been such good advice already. But, you know, I think that really even helps going into like picking a presentation style and to say like picking a topic that you might not be an expert in, but you're curious on. If you ask me like to present on something that I wasn't an expert on, I would say, are you crazy? But approaching it from the like perspective of it can be a collaborative discussion makes sense. So I really like that.
It definitely helps if you are really familiar. It does make the conversation piece of it easier. It definitely helps with anxiety levels, knowing that it's something that if you, if you're, God forbid that your PowerPoint doesn't work that day, you're going, without any notes. If it's something that you still feel you can talk about, it does make that a lot easier. It lessens that anxiety that you're going to have to tech issues, things like that. Definitely happened to us at the NASPA Student Success Conference last year, where it took about 10 minutes to get our PowerPoint up and running. But thankfully, again, this is another thing that when you're picking a topic, if you want to pick a co-presenter or co-presenters that can also, like, they might be an expert in an area you're not, and that way you can strengthen your overall proposal by having different fields of expertise. That's definitely something that is worthwhile, and also can alleviate some of that concern of like, well, what if I'm not the expert in the room? What if somebody asks a question I don't know? Somebody on your team probably does. And then somebody can also be trying to fix the PowerPoint while you start the presentation. So
I 100% agree with that, in part because I just came back from Seattle from the first year experience conference, and we had several presenters that had issues with technology, and it is just part of the traveling process. It's a part of the teaching experience as well, I would say. And get people around you that you can tap into. Don't let it increase your anxiety. Just try to find somebody that can help you and engage the audience, because 9 times out of 10, they're going to be extremely sympathetic, even if you do have a technology problem. And if you do have another expert in that room or someone that has engaged on that topic before, that is actually, in my opinion, better than having a bunch of novices in your audience, because you're going to have a more engaging discussion about what are you doing at your institution versus what this program might look like, or what this research might say versus this research, because you want to have discussion, and discussion doesn't always mean the same ideas are coming out. It means different ideas are going to come out of that subject area. or content.
I would also say, as far as picking a proposal topic, just paying attention to the audience at the conference that you're planning to apply to, paying attention to the theme of that year. If there are materials that they provide for people submitting proposals, read through those, see if there's anything that they'd like you to hit on. So like the National College Attainment Network actually has an entire packet that they send out to people, and they literally they say the areas they want presentations in, and then they actually put little fire symbols besides the ones that have the most interest from their members. So you can kind of gear your presentation toward what is more likely to be accepted, and also to be of interest to people attending the conference.
And if you're going to a larger conference, sometimes you might have the opportunity to do a part 1 and a part 2. So pay attention to what formats that they allow for that presentation. Are they asking for more discussion based style or more of a lecture based? Because sometimes, again, in those proposals, you'll be able to select what type of format that presentation will be in. And some conferences, the one I just came from in Seattle, we had part 1 and part 2 sessions where the content was broken down. First session was an hour, maybe on day 1. Second session was, it was building blocks for the content. So if it's a longer conference, you might have the opportunity to submit more than one proposal if there's a building block option. If not, keep in mind the subject area that you want to cover given the time constraints that you might have, and always leave more room than you would think for questions at the end. I feel like that is a big one that I've noticed, especially going to many larger regional conferences, is that sometimes presenters don't leave enough question time at the end or discussion time.
Would you guys have any advice on trying to select your like presentation style lecture versus doing a panel, working in a group, whether you're going to go solo or bring in some of your co-presenters?
I've never hosted a workshop that Melissa Swafford has, and the way that she approached it and the way she told us she approached it was she felt like the topic could be a lecture, could definitely be kind of a traditional conference presentation, but she wanted people to get a jump on actually being able to start their own. So I think the way they set it up, it was like 15 minutes of here's what we did, how would you do that? And then they kind of went around to each table to kind of talk to people, answer questions, things like that. So that was much more interactive. To all of the ones I have given so far, I've either been on panels or have been like kind of traditional lecture style with like discussion and audience engagement. So I think some of it is just based on what you're comfortable with, what the subject material you're working with, kind of if it's an area where multiple voices in the room makes sense, then maybe a panel is the best way to go. But if you're just trying to convey information, probably the typical lecture style would probably be the most suitable. Stephanie, what do you think?
I agree with that. And if you're going to do a lecture style, I like to incorporate, and I love presentations that incorporate a prompt to get the audience members thinking, to get responses going. I feel that leads to more engagement and idea sharing, especially at the end. But be careful not to do it too much throughout the presentation, because then it, again, takes down the time from the information that you might be trying to deliver. With panels, it's a good idea to think about the diversity of the panel that you're trying to form. What type of experts are you bringing in? So you're not having the same voice throughout that panel. And different levels of experience, I think, is good for panel experience. I'm a big lecture person and discussion person, so I like both types of formats. I've not done a workshop driven presentation as of yet. With students I have, but not at a conference.
Thank you. And I just kind of wanted to ask again, like, because you both have shared great anecdotes about your conference presenting experiences, but just wanted to see if there were any other like anecdotes you have in your bag to share, maybe some of your earlier presentations, how those went, or what that experience was like compared to where you're at now.
So if you're in a place where, again, I was on a grant where we had to present at multiple places, you can definitely reuse some of your proposal materials. Don't be afraid to do that. We tell students to do that with scholarship applications, that, college applications, we can do it too. Be pretty intentional. A lot of places now will request learning outcomes, and I have seen more successful presentations be very action oriented rather than passive. So what are people going to learn? What are they going to take away? Be concrete, be very clear. If you have handouts or you have something that attendees are going to physically take away, make sure you talk about that, because that tends to, in my experience, that's been pretty popular. You can also, plan out which conference may be the best fit for you. Do you want to start at a smaller conference? Do you want to jump into a larger conference? The requirements for proposals vary very, very widely. Some are pretty straightforward. They want, a description of what you're going to be talking about, maybe a blurb for the conference handbook, and then maybe some learning objectives. NASPA Student Success in particular is the one that stands out to me because they want citations in their proposal, which again is not above and beyond anything we would do normally, but it's just something that you need to be aware of and kind of work into your planning.
I would say prepare, and then if you still prepare some more and have backups. I think it's a good idea to have handouts available for your audience members so that they have a takeaway, and to include your contact information on that handout if you're going to be physically giving out a piece of paper. The other thing that I have noticed as a trend is inserting QR codes into your PowerPoint presentation, where the audience members can actually scan that QR code and get a direct link to a Google Drive, where you might, one, share your slides, two, any addendums. I was at a presentation last week where it was 30 different teaching ideas, and there were 30 different lesson plans attached in the Google Drive. And that is an amazing resource that that person was willing to share with audience members along with their slides. That's not something that someone wants to carry around at a conference, but it's a great electronic resource. I would also advise everyone, if you're going to be presenting, bring a stack of your business cards in case you want to hand those out to further network, or ask to collect business cards. If people have a question, they could write the question on the back of their business card and put that card up, and now you have that person's contact information to potentially follow up with them. I like to prepare, as I mentioned, prepare, have your presentation available not only electronically in your cloud, but if you have a hard physical copy, that is helpful if you do encounter those technology issues or barriers. That way you're not wasting anyone's time. I like to have fun when I present, so I always like a good call and response, just like when I'm teaching, and good discussion and debate. And don't be afraid. Please don't be afraid if someone questions you on your research. Have your resources at the end somewhere available. If you have to, you can go directly to that slide. But every now and again, you're going to have someone that is going to question that idea or question that topic, and that's okay. That's where true discussion happens, when people have different ideas.
Yeah, it was very scary for me to, like, what I was always worried about, I was going to get a question that I didn't know the answer to, and finally it became like, okay, well, so what? I don't know the answer. I've got to find out, because it's going to bother me that I don't know the answer. But that's where you, again, ask for contact information. You can follow up later. Something that has worked for us so our transfer center presented a couple times last year. Something that's worked for us is also involving things like Mentimeter or Kahoot, just to get, an idea of who's in the room. We did a word cloud for like the first word that came to your mind when you think of transfer students, and that was very illuminating with the audience we had. So it's a good idea. It's a good way to just kind of get to know who's around. And also you have that data later. So you know who was who came, for your schools, to your schools, private, public. And it's just, helpful to have when you're reporting back at your own home institution. Also make sure you always count how many people are in the room, because everybody's going to ask. Sometimes it's hard to do that. So assign one person you're with to just get a general head count, because that'll be helpful later too.
All right. Well, thank you guys. I'm going to transition a bit into the OTC conference proposal specific information, which I think you both might have some still valuable comments. So feel free to continue to join this conversation here.
Helen, I was just going to add one comment being
Oh,
on.
yes. Yeah,
And I'm
please.
sure Allison and Stephanie may have been also on back ends of conferences or helping a volunteer, reviewing proposals and things like that. I would say, even if it's your first one, we're always wanting to look at a variety of different proposals. So the research and reviewing, making sure you're following the rules for the proposal is fantastic, but being outside the box is okay too. Allison's advice on finding something that you might think is missing. If you think it's missing, a lot of folks will too, but I would definitely encourage folks to try since we're transitioning to the Ohio Transfer Council annual conference, it is a fantastic first presentation venue. It just really is. If you haven't already been, it's a fantastic place to try out a presentation. Maybe it's something you've done as a webinar before and you want to build it up some. Maybe it's something you're thinking about proposing to a bigger conference. It's a really great place to be a first-time presenter.
I just second that as somebody whose one of my first presentations was at OTC. Everybody was incredibly kind, supportive. I think I've done 3 at this point, and it's always the same. It's just a great crowd.
There was actually a question in the chat too. The question was, if a proposal isn't accepted, is it standard for the conference to let you know why or areas of improvement? In Stephanie and Allison and Helen, if you differ, you can let me know, but I would say it probably isn't standard for them to let you know why it wasn't accepted. They may have kind of a form email. I know with Ohio Transfer Council, at least for the last couple of years, as we've been building the conference back up, there haven't been a lot that have been denied, but I do think it's completely appropriate to ask, especially if you're trying to grow as a professional and as a presenter. They definitely would want to be like, hey, this was fantastic. We had other similar ones that were a better fit for our theme, or, hey, this one just wasn't a good fit for our conference, but it may be a good for another one. Or, hey, this wasn't quite researched well enough for us. So I think that there would definitely be an opportunity. Now, that's speaking from maybe smaller conferences. As you look at bigger ones, they might not have the time to give you some of that direct feedback, but I'd say it's probably worth asking, especially if you're wanting to grow. And then I would also encourage you to share it with colleagues. If you had one that maybe wasn't accepted, but you think it was a really great idea, if there's other folks or a mentor that you feel comfortable sharing it with, they might be able to give you some feedback on either another conference where it could be a good fit or ways to improve.
For some of those larger conferences too that have big groups of reviewers, I believe some of those larger conferences have been willing to send out kind of the anonymous rubric that was used that might have some notes on it. So it's not always worth asking.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The ones where I've been on the reviewing end, we didn't even know the names of the folks that were submitting them. It was all based on the rubric, and then it would just be the way that they were scoring. In some years, they might score certain presentations in certain ways. And like Allison mentioned, if they're driving towards certain topics, ones that fit along with those are probably more likely to be accepted.
I think that's where you want to know the rules of the game when you're submitting your proposal and make sure that you're hitting those check marks very clearly, because that will increase the likelihood of your proposal getting accepted. But also know that at some of the larger conferences, there's many proposals that are submitted, and it could just be a highly competitive year, and you might have had a great product, but it was just a highly competitive year.
Also doesn't hurt to do a scan of your home institution and see if anybody else is submitting proposals to a conference. Sometimes if they get 5 proposals from one school, they're definitely going to probably limit that. So it doesn't hurt to know who else is submitting proposals, or to see if it maybe makes sense to team up with that and do a combined proposal instead.
That feels like a good segue to the fact that, like I mentioned, proposals are open for the OTC annual conference that's happening June 14th. So please mark your calendars for the conference in general. But, you know, I think we started kind of touching on some of those, like knowing the parameters, knowing what the proposal is looking for. So I wanted to include some information on what you can expect from the OTC proposal form if you haven't looked at it yet, or if it hasn't really been on your radar yet. So the deadline to submit your proposal is March 15th, and selected proposals we'll find out on April 5th. So to confirm the participation. So that'll be nice to give you kind of like a little bit of that time frame of like, you know, if you've submitted and you're waiting to hear, yeah, you have a little bit of a time frame of when that decision's happening. And you also have time to get the proposal together still. The proposals are open to OTC members, staff, faculty, at your college or university. So it's a very open option. I believe Amanda dropped the link to the proposal form in the chat.
Sure did.
Thank you, thank you. And then Melissa Swafford is our chair of the Events and Professional Development Committee. So any questions about submitting your proposal or with anything with the conference, feel free to reach out to her directly. I've included her email here on the slide. And then I wanted to share some of the bigger pieces that are on the annual conference proposal form to give you a little taste of what you're going to be asked to provide. I just imagined, like, if I was in the shoes of somebody who was told like, oh, you should, you know, submit a proposal, that might feel daunting to me. And I might feel like, oh, I don't even have enough time and not look at it maybe. But you can see it's not the bulkiest proposal form in the world. So really, some of the things that you might want to be thinking of ahead of time is, in addition to, you know, what are you going to talk about, which hopefully now you've got a little bit more inspiration on how to pick a topic, but do you want somebody to present with you? Are you fine with going solo? That is information that you would kind of need when you're filling out your form, what you're going to call your session. The description, it can be pretty brief, just at 50 characters or 50 words. I think Allison kind of alluded, some proposals might want you to have learning objectives, and this one is one of those proposals that we do want to see the learning objectives. And then the last item on this kind of slide is specific requests. So, you know, from personal experience, I've never had a specific request that I've needed, just because all rooms usually are set up with the basics. But if you do have any types of, I'll say bells and whistles, even though a specific request might just be making sure another piece of technology is in there as well.
Yeah,
Something
Helen,
to
a
be
good example is
mindful.
I'd like to use video, or I'd like to have something that has audio with it and different things like that. And I know we're going to be in a different venue, and I'm really excited about a new venue for this year, but sometimes our venue has kind of limitations. So that's important to include. And then, at least in my experience, if it's something that they can accommodate, they can let you know if you're accepted. And if it's something that they can't do, then they can let you know, so that way it can be adjusted, because I know not all of our spaces have areas where they have speakers and audio and things like that.
Thank you. Helpful for me. Even. So I want to kind of just take a moment and pause and see, you know, if folks in the webinar now have questions, either for, you know, Stephanie, Allison, if you have questions about the OTC proposal form, anything like that. I want to kind of get a pulse and see if.
Yep. And I'll just add, Helen, I think this is probably an okay time. Feel free to unmute yourself and you can say your question, or if you'd rather just add it to the chat, or if you want to send it to me directly. You know, I know sometimes we feel like our questions might be silly, and I assure you they're not, but we can also ask it for you, and that's no problem.
And I'm a little bit curious, if there's anyone here who maybe has, because even though when I was thinking about this webinar, I thought it would be great for people who are maybe newer into the presentation world. But I also thought from the standpoint of, if you are a mentor to someone, if you're a supervisor to someone, and there's somebody that's in your space that, maybe hasn't done this yet, and you see it as being something that'll really help them evolve as a professional, like how can we take this information and maybe make sure it is accessible, and that, just because they might know that they can submit a proposal, what's keeping them from not submitting it? So they, if they aren't on this call or on the webinar, it might be helpful to share some of this with them, take it to them. So.
And if you know somebody at work that did something that's a crazy cool project, I would definitely say, hey, that sounds like it might be a great fit for a presentation. I know sometimes we do things that might seem small, but lots of things that we do, other schools might not be doing. So it's always great to share that knowledge. And especially if it's something that is improved, gosh, even if it seems like it might be a small improvement, I know as a participant in a conference, that's why I'm there, to learn about small, medium, and large scale things that can help me improve what we're doing.
One thing that I would say that I think is helpful if you are concerned about going to a conference and the cost of attendance and registration is have an open conversation about with your supervisor about if they would be supportive or if your institution would be supportive. Sometimes you can save money on going to conferences by having travel companions, things like that, shared driving, especially if it's more of a local one. And you might be surprised how supportive your institution might be if cost is one of the things that might prohibit you from submitting a proposal or even going to a conference.
Some conferences, especially the larger ones, also have scholarships for people who wouldn't be able to attend for financial reasons. So it's always worth taking a look at those. Those funds are there for a reason. So.
We did have a question in the chat. It said, do we know where on campus at ODU the conference will be held? I believe that's upcoming information. I don't know exactly what portion of campus. I do know, just to be really transparent, our board is actually going to campus next week to check out the spaces. So I think additional details like that will definitely be forthcoming. Usually we'll publish a full conference page on our OTC website, which it'll start sharing parking, recommended hotels, different things like that. So a lot of that information will be coming out soon. That also means don't ignore your OTC emails. I know that especially in the season when we have a lot of webinars and with the proposals opening and reminders to register, a lot of that information, and when you see it, feel free to click in that, and hopefully we usually do a really great job of sending out information ahead of the conference. So they'll be coming out to you.
Is there anybody in our audience today who'd like to share maybe some of their advice that they would give to others? Share your secrets. We did have a
Coffee is the
question.
secret. Coffee is the secret, Helen.
All right. Well, I'll keep it flowing. I'll keep the Java going. So we did have a question for the OTC conference. Who is the audience, advisors, registrar, staff, etc.? I would say all of those, yes. Usually it's going to be somebody that has some tie to transfer. I think there's the recruiting side of it too that I think you see it at OTC. And I think the audience is usually, it is everything. It's the 4-year, the 2-year, public-private. So I think it's a pretty broad.
Yeah, and to Helen's point, I think that each year, and I don't imagine it changing for next year, there's usually sessions that are geared towards 2 years, geared towards 4 years, the combination of the two. So, and I know that we've even in the past tried to expand our membership to advisors and different folks on campuses. So, especially those that are maybe new to transfer in advising or transfer recruitment or anything like that, this is a really good conference for them too, because they can get to learn a lot.
You'll also be surprised as who shows up in your room when you're presenting. I know last year at OTC, I gave a couple very specific, like a student facing staff perspective on advising students and things like that. But I had people who worked on pathways in the rooms, people from ODHE came and stopped by. So again, everybody's interested to hear what you have to say. So don't feel like you're limiting yourself by focusing on something that you genuinely are passionate about, care about, or know a lot about.
Yeah, and I'd say even if it's a topic that you feel like you've seen, there's so much merit to the fact that your perspective is valuable, and what are the chances that those people have heard your perspective? So maybe it's just shifting it away when you write your title to really make that stand out.
And one thing I love about what Ohio Transfer Council does for their annual conference is we combine the conference membership price with your annual conference. So whenever you book for the conference, we book you up for the year. So you get all the additional webinars and different things like that. So that's kind of a cool way for us to do it. Oh, and there was another question in the chat. Any recommendations of platforms for sharing a word cloud during a presentation? I know Allison mentioned Kahoot, which I think is more of a quiz-based one, maybe not a word cloud.
So we used Mentimeter for our live word cloud last year. I'm sure there are others though.
Yep. And if you remember our keynote last year, Heather Adams, she also used Mentimeter for some of the word clouds and different responses within the meeting. And that was my first experience with it. And it actually worked out really, really well.
Oh. So Misty mentioned PowerPoint might have a way to add it in. Anybody have any experience? Oh, Misty's got her hand up. Let's hear it.
Okay, so and I'll go ahead and put my video on so that way you can see my face if it'll work. There, can you see me? Sorry, I was eating lunch earlier, so but just some like brutal confessions here. I used like a word cloud thingy in one of my presentations before, and I'll be perfectly honest, I got like maybe 5 people in the audience to actually pull their phones out and use it, because everybody had at the beginning of the meeting, everybody's turning their phone off and putting it down so they don't get distracted by it, or at least that's kind of the point. And by the time you unlock your phone, find it or put in an app, or what was the website again? Where's the link? Where's the QR code? What am I scanning? And honestly, it is fun and it's interactive and it gets people involved. But I feel like it kind of wastes about 5 minutes of your presentation to get about 10 seconds of interaction. And so I almost feel like a raise your hand if kind of thing is almost better. Instead of, what does everybody, a word cloud thing might be, well, what's everybody's title here? Let's see like the wide range of people in the audience. Well, that's a big range and it would be really interesting to find out, but it's going to take a lot of time to get it. Whereas if you say something like, okay, who are all the people who work in the admissions office? Who are all the people who work in a registrar? And, if you do it, I think you can find different ways to do it to cut down on the here, find this link kind of time, and it'll still be interactive. Or even as people, like one thing to do, there's always that weird, awkward time as people are walking in the room. And you could even do something interesting as people walk in and say, hey, I want all the people. Hey, are you guys in the registrar's office? I want everybody who is a registrar people to sit on this side of the room. I want all the, something interactive as they're coming in, just to kind of get to know people and make that a little more personal contact in the beginning. And then the audience feels more comfortable and more relaxed and ready to listen instead of having to do that icebreaker moment at the very beginning of the presentation. Like just a thought for me, because I know some of my biggest errors I've made were making things too complicated, or like just being so excited about the content that you have all this overwhelming information and you don't realize it's not going to fit into this. And so you have these PowerPoint slides that have all this information because you want to share it with everybody. And I realized I was better off like keeping things to only like 3 things on the screen. Once you start getting more than 3 bullet points on a screen, it just gets overwhelming and you're reading the prior words and the next word, and like stick to 3 topics. It's okay if you have more slides with less content rather than one slide with a whole bunch of stuff on it. And I think if you can simplify it and just put like a big word and this is what we're talking about, and do you all agree with this? And I'm seeing some head nods, and like actually say what you're seeing in the audience. And also that kind of makes people accountable too. Like, oh, she's looking at me. I better make eye contact. I can't fall asleep now. It's after lunch. And so just my own personal feedback. Like I get really excited about things and I just want to educate everybody and give them like an entire semester's worth of content because I just want everyone to know it. But really there's only so much you can do in like 20 or 30 minutes and still have time to discuss it at the end,
Yeah.
So I feel
The
like if you,
feedback I'm so sorry. I was just going to say our sessions are typically just an hour or less. So that's really good feedback. Whenever Heather did hers, she had the keynote. So she had time, she had attention, it was a kind of a different scenario. But I think that's really great feedback because in the exact same day, ODHD tried to do some fancy things with their presentation and they did not work. So there's always kind of the risk, the more technical and complicated things you add, sometimes those can be a little bit more complicated. They might not work quite as well as you would think, which a lot of people learn in the moment instead of before they present. So that's really great feedback.
yeah. And heaven forbid AT&T go down again the day of the conference. Nobody's going to be able to use their phone. So.
Missy, thank you so much. Super good, like ways to kick off a presentation that I have never thought of before and are such like creative solutions to that time problem that, can sometimes come with having like the interactive piece. So, maybe that's another good, like knowing your audience, like how big is your audience going to be? Can you just manually do a little bit of some of that polling interaction, or how long do you have? Do you have enough time to give out those instructions?
I've even seen like colored index cards, which seems like really rudimentary, but it's kind of effective when you're trying to get what everybody, either their like understanding level or their feedback on, do you think this would work? Green is a yes, red is a no, and you can read the crowd really easy.
Cool. Does anybody else have any really good tips? Like, Missy, you just like hit it out of the park. I know there's some other good ideas on this call. It's okay if folks want to keep their secrets to themselves. That's very fair. We work very hard at honing the craft, so some secrets can stay.
Actually, I do have a question, and I think this is
Yeah.
one of the things that I have not done yet and is kind of on my goal for the next year is for people who have done a presentation with someone from another school, like how does that happen? I'm sure it happens differently for everybody, and it's probably something that just kind of comes naturally if two people happen to have the same interest or work closely with one another at partner schools. But I mean, I'm not an admissions counselor. I'm not usually somebody who's, like at the front door of the institution. And so I don't really have a whole lot of opportunities where somebody asks me, hey, would you like to get together and do a presentation on this particular subject? Like I've been on panel discussions like 2 or 3 times, but not really like those joint presentations where somebody's like, this is how we handle this. And we agree that this is the best practice. And, taking turns talking. And like, I just feel like when I see those presentations, those ones are kind of, they hit more because I feel like I'm not just getting one person's perspective. I'm getting a perspective from multiple institutions across different situations that feels more important or more like the difference between an experiment done with 10,000 people versus 500 people, like, and so I listen to that more. I feel like that's a bigger impact when you're able to present with someone from a different institution. But like for people who have done that, how did that start?
I think that's a great question, Misty. And I will tell you that I have done a few presentations that were not panel, but were actual presentations with peers from other institutions. And I would say that it started because one, I work with partnership programs. So there's already a natural conversation happening between two different institutions and personnel. But for some of my other presentations where I've partnered with other institutions, it's from networking and sharing ideas or doing outreach, or someone who might have left my institution and gone to a new institution and implementing something similar, and we stay into close contact, like, hey, would you want to present such and such idea? You have this twist, I have this twist, to that subject area. So I think there's natural opportunities when you have staffing transitions to potentially reconnect with staff if you're not necessarily in a partnership program. But the other thing that I have found is when I've been doing benchmarking with other institutions and not just sending an email benchmarking, calling, following up, asking if I can have a meeting, you build relationships that way. And sometimes you might identify a subject area or a problem or an up and coming issue that might be a good topic for a presentation from that natural work that you might be doing with benchmarking, for your current role. And so I look at it as just opportunities. Like anytime you're outreaching to someone at another institution, it's an opportunity to meet someone. Or maybe there's someone that you're close to at another institution that might have a shared role or a slightly different role, but an interest in the same subject matter. That's a good way to connect.
Yep, I definitely agree with all of that. Also, I've seen people post on professional groups on Facebook and LinkedIn saying, I'm interested in this topic. Is anybody else going to this conference and maybe wants to consider co-presenting or be on a panel, something like that. So again, a good way to network with people you might not have already existing connections with.
It does feel like a shameless plug opportunity for the President Social at the Ohio Transfer Council. Even if you're not going to be making a submission for this conference, or if you're new and you're still getting your feet wet, we do have our President Social that we typically host before the Ohio Transfer Council annual conference. So that's a really great opportunity. We just added a sticker swap. So it's a kind of a low stress, fun snacks and drinks time where you might be able to connect with some other folks. So I definitely hope that folks can plan to attend that. I know not everybody can come in the night before or lives locally to attend it, but that's one great opportunity, especially if you are not coordinating with other universities and colleges on a regular basis. That might be a good way to jump in.
Thanks, guys. Any other questions for the group? And also, Misty, I hope that you achieve this like goal for your year. I can see it for you.
Thanks. Hey, if anything, like just me saying out loud here in this group, you know, I guess that's me volunteering to see if anybody else is interested in something they want to
Yes.
co-present. So,
Who wants to submit a proposal with Misty? That's
right?
that's our final question. Just kidding. We could do another
Yeah.
question.
But I mean, like honestly, there's just so many things, and with the way the world is right now and all the changes and everything, I don't think there's any topic that anybody's presented on in the past either that couldn't be redone because the world's such a different place. And just, you know, like, okay, we talked about this last year, but let's talk about it this year in light of this, and this. What's changed since then, you know?
Yep.
So
And
it's
I'm
just,
gonna volunteer some of my other executive board and other committee leaders for Ohio Transfer Council. If you wanted to go to the Ohio Transfer Council website, we have quite a few institutions represented on our committee leaders and executive board. If you are starting from scratch, but there's another school that you think might be doing something similar, or you want to see what they're doing, I think there's probably a really good place that you could start, and they could connect you with somebody. I know that people really like those presentations. So we're eager to help if we can help connect you with some folks at other institutions. And then we could, you know, again, as a referral or somebody at our own institution, I think we'd be happy to do that. Especially if you have a topic in mind. Usually for me, if somebody mentions a topic, I'm like, oh my gosh, that would be great for so-and-so. And then I'd be like, I'm happy to connect you. But that might be a good place to kind of connect with some people at other institutions. And I'm going to drop that into the chat as well.
thank you.
Well, I think I'll be bold and say last call for any like last minute questions before we, you know, wrap. Misty, your square looks highlighted. I don't know if that means I don't think that's your hand raised, but just want to double check.
It's probably just because I was the last person that talked.
Got it. Thanks. I've used Zoom. So okay. If there's no other
And that's a total
questions-
guess because I don't usually use Zoom. So I'm like, I'm just guessing at that.
I just wanted to make sure, I guess. But okay, if there are no other questions, thank you so much to Allison. Thank you so much to Stephanie. And thank you so much to Amanda for helping out on this webinar today. Thank you so much to everyone who joined us, listened, contributed to the conversation. This has been recorded, so it will be able to be shared with folks who weren't able to join us today. So looking forward to seeing you at the conference in June. So reach out if you have any questions.
Okay, perfect. All right, I'll go ahead and end the Zoom. Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Actually, I think Helen, you might have to do it.
Okay.